Introducing new dirty drinks from Sonic. Whatever your fave is, you can now make it dirty. Fanta fans can make it dirty. Dr. Pepper devotees can make it dirty. Even ocean water aficionados can make it dirty. You name it, we can make it dirty. Now you may be asking yourself, how do you make a Sonic drink dirty? By infusing it with a delicious blend of coconut flavor, sweet cream, and lime, of course. What were you thinking? Get your brain out of the gutter. New dirty drinks, now at Sonic. Fanta and Dr. Pepper are used under license. Limited time only at participating Sonic drive-ins.
Ooh, a spicy question. I
because
love
the
it.
writing is sort of everything, right? Like you kind of can fix plot holes, but if the writing isn't
So some
there,
readers love that, and some readers are like, but I wanted more of this. So it's kind of a gamble.
Hello and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by a critically acclaimed writer of adult and young adult and non-fiction, all the way from Victoria, Australia. It's Eliza Henry-Jones. Hi.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Welcome. We are recording this just days before your most recent novel, Salt and Skin, comes out in the UK. It's been out in Australia for a while now, but it's about to come to the UK. Tell us a little bit about it.
So I wrote Salt and Skin during the COVID lockdowns down here in Australia, and where I am in Melbourne had some of the longest lockdowns in the world. So, which was both, I think, quite conducive to writing and also made things a little bit trickier. But Salt and Skin took me about, I think, 3 years to write. And it's a story of a bereaved woman called Luda and her 2 teenage children. And it's a story of them moving from their drought-stricken farm in Australia to a collection of remote Scottish islands, which were inspired by the Orkneys, but I wouldn't go as far to say as the story being set there, because I just took far too many very, very wild detours from anything factual. And I was very inspired by the Orcadian witch hunts that happened there in the 17th century. And so there's a thread of that running through this fictionalized version of the islands. And it's a story of how this quite fragmented family each find connection and meaning on these islands. And one of them through deep diving into the North Sea, another through seeking out the fragmented pieces of the witches' stories, and another one through searching out the origins of a wild foundling who's suspected of being a selkie. And all the while, I really wanted this atmosphere to be sort of simmering away in the back, this tension growing. And there's this, hopefully there's this sense of the simmering violence that I suppose caused the witch trials continuing on into the present.
Yes. Yeah. It is sort of pseudo supernatural element to it without being too kind of fantastical.
Yes, it's liminal. I wanted to have, selkies and ghosts and mermaids and witches that had been alive for hundreds of years, but I also wanted there to be this kind of adjacent narrative that could explain it a lot more mundanely. I had a lot of fun, basically.
And speaking of, I mean, this is your 5th novel, and all of your stories have a very strong emphasis on like families and identity and loss. Am I right in thinking that you've studied those areas within like psychology?
Yes, so I studied psychology and grief, loss and trauma counselling, and I worked for quite a few years in the drug rehabilitation sector, so working with families where there was parental substance abuse and children, and it's a big focus on getting people linked in with community and trying to stop those patterns of transgenerational trauma happening over and over.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's Roxane Gay that talks about how so often in writing you just end up continuously just pressing on the bruise and just circling back again and again to these same topics and themes. And I swear if I set out to write a story about a beach ball or a tree or something, it would somehow circle back and end up being about families and grief and trauma.
Yeah. There's people always say, write what you know, but I think in some ways it's almost impossible not to, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Like you always come back to it.
And I think we end up knowing about what we're curious about, right? We end up circling those things.
That's true. With all of your stories, do you think it's a sort of, I guess this is a chicken and egg thing. Does the inception of the kind of characters and the settings and the narratives come from your kind of knowledge of trauma and like the things you've studied and the things you've seen, or do you think you start writing a story and then subconsciously you just bring those things in?
I think it's a really good question. I think I've always been drawn to grief and trauma. I'm just thinking back. My first young adult novel, my third novel overall, Piers for Pearl, I actually wrote that when I was 16, and it ended up being my art project for the final year of high school. And
wow.
It then sat in a drawer for 10 years. But I was just thinking of that. And again, very similar themes around mental illness and families and fragments and connection. And yeah. So I think for me, I think I've followed those topics both clinically and in my fictional work because they're very interesting to me. And I mean, Salt and Skin ended up being a PhD thesis, the creative part of a PhD thesis that again was looking at climate change and trauma and grief and, you know, how sites of trauma kind of keep haunting us. So I don't know, maybe one day I'll write something without any trauma or grief.
Maybe. P.S. for Pearl, you say you wrote that when you were 16.
Yes.
10 years sort of in the back of your mind, and then you bring it out again. I'm going to assume that there was some big edits that happened to that.
Yeah, I think when I wrote it, I was really into the thesaurus on words. So there was quite a few words that shouldn't have been in there. Okay. And I had a little bit of an existential crisis because I had to go through and like remove references to like a 6-stacker CD player. Because, you know, everyone 10 years later has obviously got, you know, MP3 players and iPhones and stuff. So that made me feel a little bit old. But yeah, it was really fascinating actually bringing that out as an adult and actually having this content that I had created when I was a member of the target audience. It was a really very strange process, but I really enjoyed it, and I was very happy that it didn't end up whiling away long years in the drawer with all my other stories.
Okay, so there are lots of books sitting locked away.
Oh yes, it's a graveyard.
Was that the first one that you ever wrote?
No, that was the third. So I wrote a manuscript a year from when I was about 14.
What? Like full length, like 60,000 words? Yeah,
70, 80,000 words.
Oh my God.
And, you know, the others are all absolutely dreadful, but and it was basically because I was a very anxious teenager and had a lot of unaddressed mental health issues, and I've never been one for journaling, but writing these very immersive works of fiction allowed me to sort of work through a lot of the stuff that I was sitting with and trying to untangle. And I think I missed about a third of high school, just basically pulling sickies. I do not recommend it. And just staying at home and just writing. And
wow.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have been the process that I would have chosen, but I think it's a time in your life where you're both very busy, but you also don't have a lot of responsibility and things obligations that you're kind of, you know, really strapped to. So I guess I took advantage of that.
Yeah, I'd say so. So you must have written dozens of books.
Yeah, quite prolific. I only type with 2 fingers, so it's very sort of aggressive, sort of just stabbing of the keyboard.
Have you ever tried to learn to like touch type and stuff, or are you happy with the 2 fingers as like part of your process?
My fingers. I don't think my keyboard is very happy.
Okay.
The keys end up getting very worn out, but I think I've just kind of embraced it. I've accepted it.
Okay, fair enough.
My 2 fingers, my furious 2-finger typing.
Okay, so let's get back onto like a more kind of publishing thing.
Yes.
Obviously, you've written a lot. You've also published. I mean, this is the 5th book that you're publishing, and does it? I'm wondering. First book you published, In the Quiet, 2015. Does it feel, when you do these kinds of launch things, and I know this came out last year in Australia, so you probably had a whole press launch back then, but does it feel very different when you release a novel now from back in 2015 when your first one came out?
Oh, absolutely. I used to feel like I was going to throw up every time I had to public speak or talk to anyone about anything. I really struggled with that. And I don't know, sometime over the last 8 years, and I think teaching at university definitely helped, but I just sort of reached this saturation point, and now I enjoy it. Like it's such a lovely thing to get to sit down and chat books and writing and stories with people.
Yeah. It's interesting how it changes for a lot of people. A lot of people, there's also like a kind of, obviously there's a massive excitement when your first book's coming out, but then there's like a sort of the not knowing can be really scary at the same time.
Oh, absolutely.
People seem to kind of be much more relaxed with the second one. And then when the third one comes around, it's a kind of like, oh, I know how this goes. I can just enjoy it and have fun.
It is a little bit like that. And I remember a wonderful writer, Solari Gantil. I ran into her just as my first book had come back from the printer, and remember her telling me that, there's nothing that feels quite as special in the book world as just cradling that first print run of your first novel and to just carry it around and cuddle it like a cat.
That's the kind of thing that I think a lot of people see as like the dream is the tangible thing of like going into a bookshop and holding, like seeing a book on the shelf and holding it for the first time and be like, wow, I created this, and look at all the other books that it's with. Yes,
because it's suddenly a thing, it's
it's real.
Physical thing with hopefully a pretty cover. And, I think 8 years since I was published, and I haven't lost that sense of astonishment that people are willing to give, the most valuable thing that we have as human beings is our time. And the fact that people will spend their valuable time in this world that I just made up just absolutely feels incredibly magical.
Yes.
And it's also thinking that it's kind of ironic that you've got generally a collection of people who are very happy sitting in they're happy in their own company. They're happy just sitting. They're happy just not having huge interaction with other people. And then, you get a book published and suddenly you've got to talk to all sorts of people and articulate your work and do all this public facing stuff, and I suspect that, like the Venn diagram of people, people who write and people who love public speaking, I think instinctively would be two very separate circles. Like wouldn't be a lot of overlap, I imagine.
Yeah, it would probably skew towards not wanting to public speak, but liking to write, I imagine. Yeah. But getting back onto, it's a very different experience now that you've launched a number of books. Going back to, In the Quiet, your first published novel, has your approach to writing changed a lot since then?
Absolutely. It's changed massively. And I've just been thinking about that actually as I sort of am in the early stages of working on my next book. And I think I'm a lot more aware of what my weaknesses are as a writer, and I'm a lot more willing to sort of seek out books on craft and journal articles and all that sort of thing to try and enrich my practice. And I think when my first book had come out, I was so uncertain about writing that anytime I'd picked up any sort of craft book and tried to sort of, in inverted commas, get better at writing, I just ended up feeling like there was nothing valid about my process and that I didn't write like that, so I wasn't a real writer. I'd never be a real writer, and I'd try to sort of enact all these things that just didn't fit in with how I wrote. And I think the difference is now that I'm a lot more aware of what I need to work on and aware of what's going to fit in with what works for me as a writer. So I can read things and go, okay, that's not useful. That's not useful. Oh, here's a little nugget. This is really good. I'm going to start thinking about it like this.
Yeah.
Which, is a bit slightly counterintuitive, I guess, but I've also really been enjoying just really delving into those texts. I also think that I'm stepping outside my comfort zone a lot more. My previous 4 novels were very much in my existing wheelhouse. They were looking at family. They were set solely in Australia. They were drawing on, areas that I already knew a lot about, whereas Salt and Skin was this just very comparatively ambitious project. It was set on the Orkneys. It's across 5 different character perspectives. It's across quite a few years. It deals with these really big topics. And there's a lot of topics. There's a lot of things going on. I think that I'm more willing to step outside of my comfort zone now than I was, which is good because I think it keeps the actual process of writing more interesting and exciting. And
yeah, I think the times when it almost like a writing exercise. I think it's so healthy for writers to, you know, let's say that you write procedural crime. If you just as a writing exercise spent a few hours and were like, you know what, I'm just going to write you know, like a crazy fantasy excerpt with like magic and fairies and things, doing something like that and really like focusing on it. Even if you never decide to do that, I think it opens up whole new kind of like ways of looking at things when you go back to the thing that you're more familiar with.
Absolutely, because it all like drills down to story, doesn't it?
Exactly.
And telling a story and having something that breathes in the narrative. And I think that really does transcend genre.
Yeah, 100%. I was talking to someone about this recently. I'll read almost any genre there is, because the thing that like grabs me is like, what's the narrative? Like, can I attach to the characters, and like, do the characters kind of go on a journey that draws me in?
Yes, absolutely.
Purchase new wiper blades from O'Reilly Auto Parts today and we'll install them for free. See better and drive safer with O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
So talking about your process and how it's changed, are you, and this is something that I find people often say does kind of change as they kind of write more books and go through the motions. Are you someone that plans everything out meticulously, or are you a sort of go with the flow?
Oh, Lord, I wish I was someone that planned everything meticulously. I've got a brilliant group of writerly friends here in Australia, and some of them are just these absolutely magical, meticulous plotters, and they'll spend 3 months plotting everything down. They use those little cue cards, colored cue cards with the lines.
Okay.
And they know every scene in every chapter, and they write the story chronologically, do some light edits, and then that book's kind of ready for publication. Whereas I am a chaos demon. I have to have the voice at the start. I have to have the voice, and I have to have a sense of the vague themes that I want to explore. And then it either comes down to setting or character or something that's more visceral and anchoring. But yeah, once I've got the voice and I've kind of waddled along for maybe 10, 15,000 words, and I feel like, right, I've got my starting point. I've sort of put the peg in the earth. I'll then often jump to the very end and write the ending. So I know where I'm headed. I don't have no idea how I'm going to get there, but I like to know
interesting.
Where I'm going. And this is quite funny. I've always written, how would you describe it? Jumping around. Like I don't write chronologically. I will jump to whatever scene I feel like writing. And I kind of justified it as, and I do think it works in this way, I justified it as, you know, if you're writing about what you're interested in, the scene that feels most urgent to you on any given day, it's actually going to translate and really strengthen your writing. And then you can just kind of thread together those key, vital, urgent scenes at the end. And you've sort of got, hopefully, this narrative that really keeps chugging along. But halfway through writing Salt and Skin, I was actually diagnosed with ADHD. And suddenly my process of just jumping around like I'm on a pogo stick throughout the manuscript suddenly just made a lot more sense.
It's like, oh, okay, I can put a label on this. That's why. It's interesting because I've heard two arguments for doing either side of that kind of thing. In Brandon Sanderson's series of lectures, which are all online on YouTube for free, I recommend anyone watch them. They're really, really good. He kind of very much is in your camp of, if something is like, if he's thought of a scene or a sequence that's going to happen and it's happened and he's not there yet, if he's writing chronologically, he'll jump forward and write that because he's like, the energy and excitement I need to like write that now because it's going to be at its best when I'm like really excited to get to it. And then conversely, a friend of mine they use the exciting scene as a sort of carrot on the stick, as like it's going to be so great when I get there. I've got to like buckle down and just get through this bit, and then I can have my really fun bit afterwards, and that works for them. So you can see both sides of that discussion, and it's like you said earlier, you got to find the thing that works for you.
Absolutely. And I was listening to a podcast recently with George Saunders, whose work and any material he puts out I absolutely love. But he was talking about, and I felt very attacked by this, he was talking about how It actually makes no difference whether you enjoy the process or not. And I think I'd been using that a little bit as a get out of jail free card for myself. Like if I wasn't really feeling it, I'd be like, oh, there's no point working on that today. I'm just going to get along with something else. But he thinks that, there's no discernible difference. And you should just, do the hard work, get it done, sort of grit your teeth and slog through. And I did kind of feel a little bit attacked. So I guess, it's just finding what works. And I think as well, it can shift as you continue to write. It can shift over years. And I think it can really shift from book to book. I used to imagine that, authors that had several books out would know how to write books. And for me, every time I sit down to write a book, the process has been quite different. Like every single story is its own beast with its own challenges and its own little foibles. So, maybe I'll get there in 50 years. I'm still writing. I'll work out how to do it.
I bet you, because you have written so much, you said that you wrote full manuscripts every year from the age of 14 or 15. I bet there is a very subconscious part of your brain that is very trained on how you're structuring things, and the stuff that you're focusing on is much more kind of nuanced things that I think probably a lot of writers who haven't written as much as you, who haven't practiced as much, probably aren't even focusing on the kind of nuances at the kind of earlier drafts because they don't have the breadth of practice that you have got, if that makes sense.
That is one of the most comforting things anyone has ever said to me. Thank you, Jamie.
You're so welcome. But I think that has to be true, because I think writing is a creative art, and I think all the creative arts are so much of it just comes down to practice, that you need to practice the craft and then you will get better and it will just kind of be ingrained within you.
I do like that. And I think that sits alongside this idea of sort of helplessly circling back to the same topics, because it does come from quite a wordless place. It comes from your subconscious, and maybe the practical side of things comes from there too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it has to at a certain point. It's like, practicing for any kind of sport or anything.
Yes.
At first you're really concentrating on the motions, and then the more you do it, you forget about the motions, and then you're concentrating on perfecting your aim or a very specific technique, because everything else is just second nature at that point.
Absolutely. And I think because those goalposts keep shifting, and your focus keeps getting more and more specific, the focus, I guess, sort of stays at the same level, so you perhaps don't feel like that improvement is happening as much as it is, or you don't feel that growth because you're still working really hard on getting better.
Yeah. Before we get on to the last couple of questions, I'd love to ask about, so Salt and Skin came out in Australia with Ultimo and is coming out in the UK with September Books. Your previous novels were all with HarperCollins.
Yes.
Was there a big difference in how the whole process worked from working with HarperCollins to these different publishers?
I was with two different imprints at HarperCollins, so Fourth Estate for my two adult novels, and then the young adult imprint for my two young adult novels. And I think I've found each of them quite different. I think there's a lot of uniqueness in across the different imprints, and different people have different ways of working. And I think I've been incredibly lucky, though, with the people that I've worked with. Some very, very, very clever publishers and editors who I just want to go down on my hands and knees in front of them and thank them for just turning my very chaotic manuscripts into things that are arguably coherent stories.
They are, I think, definitely coherent stories. I don't know if they were before the editors got to them, but afterwards I can confirm they are coherent stories. Bless
the editors.
So I'm curious, was the working with HarperCollins, the two different imprints, were those multi-book deals?
Yes, they were.
Okay, so was that two separate 2-book deals?
Yeah, so a 3-book deal initially with Fourth Estate, and then a 2-book deal for the young adult novels. Okay.
I can't help but notice there's no 3rd book with Fourth Estate.
Oh, it's coming.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's hold on, guys. There's only so much I can write at once.
Yeah. Maybe I could master kind of, having one hand, on two keyboards and just kind of aggressively stab both at the same time.
That's it. You're being held back by only using two of your fingers.
Yeah, that's it.
Amazing. Well, I was just curious about that. And it's because it's often an author will stay with one publisher for a long time. So it's interesting to hear that you've been with two different imprints and like now different publishers as well, and that they are all great, but different and unique in their own ways. It's a very different experience from what you've kind of learned. It's a very different experience with every imprint and every publisher.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that there's a lot of movement. I don't know whether it's the same in the UK, but publishing houses here, there's, people will move from one to the other, and, different freelancers will, work across different publishing houses. So there's a lot of kind of fluidity about where people are based. Yeah.
But I guess the approach and kind of mindset is more kind of within the imprint itself, within the kind of infrastructure of each publisher.
Yeah.
Slightly off topic. I really wanted to slip this in before we get to the last question. Slightly off topic question. I'm curious because I have your press release in front of me, and it says that you are based on a flower farm. Does that mean that you grow and sell flowers wholesale?
Yeah. So I started it up with my cousin, and it's actually turned out to be this perfect thing that just beautifully complements writing, because it gets me out with other people and it gets me, hands in the dirt, out in the sunshine, away from my laptop. Oh. And there's something just so satisfying about planting a seed and then watching it grow, and then you harvest it. Yeah. And it's just such a clear kind of cycle, or I don't know. It's I
mean, the cycle of life, right?
Yeah. And so it's just like a little side project that we grow. We don't use any harmful chemicals. We grow seasonally. We've got beehives, so it's all bee friendly. We've got like little blue tongue lizards and frogs and things in the patches. And then we sell wholesale to florists, and we also sell direct to the public. And we run workshops on flower growing and flower arranging and writing in our little barn that we did up. So it's all very wholesome.
It is, yeah. And sounds a bit idyllic. I mean, are there certain times of the year where you just have a kind of beautiful field of flowers that you can sit and just write with this like lovely view in front of you?
Oh, I do. I actually rarely do that, because during those times of year, everything is so frantically busy, and we've got workshops, we're doing picks, and I can't look at it without just seeing a list of jobs. I'm sure other people could come and sit and admire the flower field while they write. But over summer, I kind of have to, I will actually go and sit in my horse's paddock in a beanbag if I want to be outside to write, which does not overlook any of the flower beds.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I thought in my head, I pictured this very beautiful, like perfect scene of you like sitting up at a desk looking over these fields of flowers, but I can see why that might stress you out.
I mean, I do bring them inside and have them in little vases on my desk, and I'll enjoy them more there, but just the patch, because I'll look at it and go, oh, I need to put in more irrigation, or oh, I need to cut that back, or I need to, weed that, or I need to put, fertilize this. And it's just, adulting, really.
Yes, being an adult, but you love it, and it sounds like a lovely venture that you guys have going there.
It is. It's good fun.
So before we get to the final question, just a quick one, what advice would you give to young writers or any age writers looking to break into publishing and get their work launched into the world?
My advice might be a little bit counterintuitive to a lot of the advice floating around out there, but for me, I think the number one priority as a writer has to be to preserve and cultivate the joy in writing, because you can sort of write to different trends, or you can write what you think a publisher wants or whatever, but things are so changeable. And you could say, okay, I'm going to write this type of thriller, but then by the time you finish, things have kind of moved on to the next kind of thing. And it's so unpredictable. And I think the only thing you really have control of as a writer is what you get out of the process of actually putting those words down on the page, which is also the part that takes the longest and the part that requires the most investment. So, and I don't mean, you just sort of sit there with an idiotic grin on your face, hammering away with two fingers at your keyboard, but you have to get something out of it. And whether that's learning about writing through writing, working on your project, whether it's writing about something that you're really passionate about, whether it's about creating a world that you just find utterly immersive and therapeutic to be in, whether you're creating these characters that you find engaging, just whatever it is, you just have to get something out of it. And I do think, and this might be a bit, idealized, but I really do think that the best stories come out of that space, regardless of what George Saunders says.
Well, my counterpoint to George Saunders would be, if it's all the same, why not write the thing that makes you happy at the time?
Well, that's it.
And then you'll be happier throughout the process, if it's all the same.
It's time's valuable.
And that brings us to the final question, which, as always, is, Eliza, if you were stranded on a desert island with a single book, which book would you take with you?
Honestly, it would depend on what day I was dropped onto this desert island. I am incredibly fickle with my favorite books. I would probably, if I was picked up and dropped onto a desert island today, it would be, possibly because we've been talking about him so much, George Saunders, Lincoln in the Bardo, which is one of my favorite books in the universe. And I just think it's so clever and so remarkable and so astonishing how he pulled that together. I think it's quite a divisive book. People either seem to really love it or really hate it, but I love it. And I think it's got enough going on in there to sort of keep me occupied for a while I'm sitting on my little island.
Yeah. And then you can ponder about whether you can try and decide which chapters he was suffering through and which ones he enjoyed writing.
Yeah, it'll keep me occupied.
Exactly. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Eliza, for coming on the podcast and telling us all about your books and your writing and publishing and flowers. I very much enjoyed hearing about your flower farm. It's been really amazing chatting with you.
Thank you so much for having me on, Jamie.
Such a pleasure. And for anyone listening, if you want to keep up with what Eliza is doing, you can follow her on Instagram and Twitter at Eliza Henry-Jones. And to make sure you don't miss an episode of this podcast, follow along on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. You can support the show on Patreon. And for more bookish chat, check out my other podcast, The Chosen Ones and Other Tropes. Thanks again to Eliza, and thanks to everyone listening. We'll catch you on the next episode.
If you own a vehicle with less than 200,000 miles and have an auto warranty about to expire or no warranty coverage at all, listen up. CarShield has a low-cost month-to-month vehicle protection plan that covers more parts than ever. Visit carshield.com/audio to find out how you could pay almost nothing for covered auto repairs. Drivers who activate this vehicle protection today will also receive free roadside assistance, free towing, and car rental options at no additional cost. Get your free quote today at carshield.com/audio. That's carshield.com/audio.